So, before we jump into the podcast episode itself, I thought that we should probably discuss the whole Trey Reed incident. So, my episode for this podcast was going to be on Emmett Till. It is still going to be on Emmett Till. However, the fact that I was in the middle of researching this and was getting ready to record it when I found out about Trey and what happened to him, in my opinion, was not a coincidence at all. What's happened to Trey is in a very similar area as to what happened with Emmett, and I just felt like it was kind of shocking that here we are, more than 50 years later, and this shit's still happening. So really quick, I want to read an ABC article that was sent to me by a friend who was like, hey, I know that you're looking into Emmett Till's case for your own educational purposes. This just happened. So we're going to read that really quick. Jackson, Mississippi police on Tuesday were investigating the death of a black college student found hanging from a tree on the campus of Delta State University in Mississippi, stirring online rumors that evoked the state's history of Jim Crow-era racist violence, even as authorities said there was no initial evidence of a crime. The campus police chief said there are no signs of foul play in the death of the 21-year-old student, whose body was discovered by a staff member early Monday near the campus pickleball courts. Delta State Police Chief Michael Peeler said there was also no evidence of an ongoing threat to students and faculty. He told reporters Monday the death investigation was being assisted by the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, as well as local police and sheriff's deputies. A woman who answered the phone at the campus police department on Tuesday said the agency had no further information to release. Online rumors that the student was found with broken limbs were disputed by Boulevard County Coroner Randolph Seals Jr. In a statement cited by local news outlets, Seals said his office conducted a preliminary examination and concluded the student did not suffer any lacerations, contusions, compound fractures, broken bones, or injuries consistent with an assault. The coroner did not immediately return phone messages Tuesday from the Associated Press. Attempts to reach the student's family weren't immediately successful. A woman identifying herself as a cousin told the AP in an online message that the family wasn't speaking to reporters, honestly understandable. Two others who said they were distant relatives declined to comment when reached by phone. In a video posted Tuesday to the university's Facebook page, Delta State President Dan Ennis said the university was resuming operations while continuing to mourn. He said campus officials were staying in touch with the student's family. We know that we can never fully heal this wound, Ennis said. We continue to cooperate with investigators. We continue to make sure that all the information necessary is given to authorities, and we continue to hope for answers. Classes were canceled Monday at the university, as were events to celebrate the 100th anniversary of its opening as Delta State Teachers College in September of 1925. Located in the heart of the Mississippi Delta near the Arkansas state line, Delta State had a fall 2024 enrollment of more than 2,600 students, 42% of them black. Numerous social media posts about the case evoked a darker period in history when killings of black people almost exclusively at the hands of white male vigilantes inflicted racial terror in Mississippi and other parts of the Deep South. The Delta State campus in Cleveland is located only about 30 miles from a site closely associated with the infamous lynching of Emmett Till. A sign at the Tallahatchie River landing near Glendora commemorates the discovery 70 years ago of Emmett Till's mutilated body in the water. So obviously these are connected, but I wanted to give my thoughts on it because as someone who has a psych degree, someone who works in law enforcement, the idea that a young man would go and hang himself on a pickleball court seems completely asinine. In my experience, and granted I could definitely be wrong, in my experience, suicides are a very private thing. It is not something that is typically done publicly. Most people do not go to a public place to kill themselves. It's at home. It's in a hotel. Hell, it's in the middle of the woods. It is not just something that they do in the middle of a college campus or on the pickleball courts. So to me, that's really fishy. Again, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here, but I think if we're saying, oh, this was a suicide, that's very short-sighted. I don't agree with that at all. Whether or not his bones were broken, fine. Okay, cool. Maybe they weren't. If they are, obviously that is a huge red flag. If they aren't, it just doesn't make sense. People that I know who have hung themselves, it has been at home in a garage. It has been out in the backyard of their shed. It has been in the middle of the woods. any suicide that I have responded to or have had colleagues respond to, it has been in a private setting, because this is going to sound really bad, but it is not illegal to kill yourself, and most people know that, and they are not going to broadcast their body and their death to the entire world. Also, again, I'm going to be talking about Emmett Till, and as the article pointed out, this is not that far from where Emmett Till's case takes place, and there's still problems to this day where memorials for Emmett Till and signs commemorating Emmett Till have to be replaced because people vandalize them. So I hope that the authorities do the right job, do their job and do the right thing, because I think this is a little bit out of campus security and campus police's realm. But I am of the opinion right now that it is definitely a hate crime, because I don't see a world where a young 21-year-old black man goes and hangs himself on a pickleball court. There's no point to it. They're not making a statement. It's not political. There's just no reason for it. So, again, I just wanted to address this because I thought the timing of it was absolutely insane. But today's episode is going to be focused on Emmett Till, and obviously Trey and what happened to him is going to be in the back of my mind for this episode. So, without further ado, I'm just going to do my intro and we're going to get into it, because I have a lot to talk about as far as Emmett Till's case goes. So, first of all, hello everybody. Welcome to Psyched Out, a podcast focused on all things psychology, like psychological thrillers, unethical experiments, true crime, cults, and more. I am your host, Emily, and for those who don't know, I have a bachelor's degree in forensic psychology and a background in law enforcement. This helps me provide unique insight on some of the world's most famous cases, movies, and events. As mentioned before, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about Emmett Till. And the reason I decided to look into this case is because of my own ignorance on the case. I can't really recall who mentioned Emmett's name to me not that long ago, but it occurred to me in that moment that I knew pretty much nothing about what happened to Emmett. I knew kind of the basics and had a general understanding, but it occurred to me like, oh, I don't know the details of this. And that realization was followed up shortly after by another one, which is my own privilege made it possible for me to live my life knowing very little about Emmett's story, because I'm white, in case you couldn't tell. And because I'm white, this case isn't something that's really affected me. Not the way that it has and continues to affect the black community. And I've never had to worry about lynchings or racism or anything like that. Obviously, being a woman, I have my own struggles, but I can't compare it to what people of color face and what the black community faces. And it was very much a slap in the face of, you're ignorant to this matter because of your own privilege. And objectively, I've always known about my white privilege, but for some reason in that particular moment, like, it really hit me in the face that, hey, this is what people are talking about when they say that, like, white people aren't educated on these matters, and it's because they haven't had to worry about them. And it's 100% true. I'm not even going to deny it. Like, this was the biggest example in my life where I went, oh shit, they're right. I really don't know a whole lot outside of what the education system has taught me. And they basically say, oh yeah, this happened to Emmett Till, he was lynched, racism is bad. And that was pretty much it. So, that's why I decided to look into this case, because I thought, you know what, it's my job to educate myself on these matters, and that's what I'm going to do. So, if you are not familiar with Emmett's case because you have been able to kind of live in this own little protected bubble the way that I have, hopefully you listen and hopefully you learn a lot, because there's a lot here in Emmett's story that I didn't know about that is just absolutely appalling. So we are going to go ahead and dive on in. I will warn you, it gets pretty heavy, but unfortunately that's the reality of the case. Emmett Till was born to Mamie and Louis Till on July 25th, 1941 in Chicago. And because I am dumb and I absolutely suck at geography, I actually had to Google and remind myself what state Chicago is in. So if you didn't know, like me, Chicago is actually a city in Illinois. I promise I'm not usually this stupid, but geography is something that I absolutely suck ass at, so there you go. Chicago is in Illinois. Never been there. My sister has. Apparently the pizza's good. Anywho, Emmett's mother, Mammy, was born in a small town of Webb, Mississippi. This area was known as the Delta region, which encompasses a large multi-county area of northwestern Mississippi, specifically in the watershed of the Yazoo and Mississippi rivers. Again, Delta State University, Delta, Mississippi, not a coincidence. When Mammy was 2 years old, her family moved to Argo, Illinois, which is pretty close to Chicago. My understanding is it's really not that far apart at all. Her family's move was part of what was known as the Great Migration. In case you didn't know what the Great Migration was, I didn't either, and I had to look it up because the American education system failed me. But the Great Migration is sometimes known as the Black Migration, which feels a little weird, so I'm just going to call it the Great Migration. During this period of time, the Great Migration was the movement of about 6 million African Americans out of the rural southern United States to the urban Northeast, Midwest, and West. This occurred between 1910 and 1970, so about a 60-year time period. The move itself was fueled by a lot of factors, one of the largest being that the South was still heavily oppressed heavily oppressing black people and using Jim Crow laws that were very much enforced to subject black people to extensive segregation. Additionally, the Great Migration was caused by poor economic and social conditions, again, due to very heavy racial segregation and discrimination. Another goal of this move was for rural black families to escape the South and its violence, such as lynchings and other racial violence. During this time period, Argo received so many southern migrants that it was named Little Mississippi, which I think is actually kind of cute. I like the idea of a big Mississippi and a little Mississippi. Mammy's mother's home was actually used by other recent migrants as a way station while they were trying to find jobs and housing. It's pretty clear in my research that amongst the black community, just about anywhere was better than the South. And, I mean, I can't blame them because I looked into the type of violence that was taking place in the South against black people because, again, it wasn't part of my history as a white person. So I thought, instead of just saying, yeah, the South was violent, let's see what type of violence was taking place against black people. And honestly, it's pretty appalling. So the first instance is that black homes were frequently bombed or burned to the ground by white supremacists. And then something that really surprised me is that after World War I, black soldiers returning home were absolutely ridiculed. They were still targeted for being black, and they were beaten, as if these people didn't just go and serve their country and fight in a world war. Like, you could at least have some respect for them, but it didn't matter. They were just seen as black and fodder, essentially. On top of this, white mobs would also frequently target black communities and intentionally destroy black property. They would lynch people for literally no other reason than they were black, and they probably looked at the white guy funny, which in reality they didn't, but they used it as a justification to murder somebody. They also would just beat people in the streets, steal from them, and then do all sorts of other insane, asinine things. On top of that, the black community was very much subjected to a lot of unethical experiments by the government, which is an episode that I will do later. But yeah, there was just a lot of racial mob violence against black communities. So again, I don't blame anybody from wanting to move out of the South. If I were in their shoes, I would do the same damn thing, especially if it means getting my kids out of that situation. Again, this is a very light overview of the violence black people faced in the South. There are countless detailed descriptions. I just can't go into all of them. So it's very clear that they were all trying to escape a system of oppression that was very much a source of pain and suffering for them. So having 6 million people leave, it makes sense. Like, why would you stay there, you know? At the time of the Great Migration, Mississippi was the poorest state in the U.S. in the 1950s, which was something I didn't know. And on top of this, the Delta counties were some of the poorest in Mississippi. And honestly, I can't imagine living in the poorest counties in the poorest state. That's like being poor squared. I frankly was blessed to have a pretty okay childhood as far as finances go. Either my parents hid it really well, but like I never really had to struggle for anything, and I never had to deal with the compounding issues of racism on top of being poor that black people had to face. I was very, very lucky and very, very blessed in that, and I acknowledge that after reading all of this, that like I seriously lucked out in a lot of areas. Mammy, who was born specifically in Tallahatchie County, would ultimately grow up in an area where the average income per white household in 1949 was about $690, which is equivalent to $9,100 as of 2024, which is an astronomically low amount of money. And I don't know how I personally would survive in today's society on less than like $10,000 a year. It's insane. And then, as if that wasn't bad enough, the deficit was increased for black families. So, like I said, white families, it was about $690. Black families, it was $462, which is equivalent to $6,100 in 2024. In the rural areas, on top of this, economic opportunities for blacks were pretty much non-existent. Like, you had one option for a job, and that was basically, hey, go be a sharecropper, which meant that you were forced to live on land owned by white people, which probably wasn't that great. And then, compounding the difficulties faced by black people, the government, in all of its glory, had essentially disenfranchised the black community and excluded them from voting and participating in the political system since 1890. This was when the white-dominated legislature passed a new constitution that raised barriers regarding voter registration and sought to exclude people of color. This is when whites had also passed ordinances establishing racial segregation and Jim Crow laws. Shocker, we're just going to exclude the people that we want to oppress from their ability to say, hey, I don't want to be oppressed, don't make those laws. Sounds a little bit familiar, America, doesn't it? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Once Emmett was born on July 25th, 1941, Mamie largely raised Emmett with her mother. Shortly after Emmett was born, she and Lewis Till had separated after Mamie discovered that Lewis had been unfaithful. What a real winner. That's honestly really unfortunate, and I feel quite bad for her because I can't imagine being a single mother back then when you can barely make any money or even have a job. Lewis would later assault Mamie by choking her to unconsciousness, again, a piece of shit move. And then once Mamie woke, she retaliated by throwing scalding water at him, which honestly, I can't blame her for it. Get your bag, boo. Do what you gotta do. Don't let that man abuse you. Do I think that you'll probably get in trouble for doing that? Yeah. I'm not saying I support women's wrongs, but in this case, I support women's wrongs. Now, due to violating court orders that asked Lewis to stay away from Mamie, Lewis Till was forced by a judge in 1943 to choose between jail or enlisting in the U.S. Army, which is not the best idea in my opinion, because sending someone into the military with blatant domestic violence issues is not a good idea. Let's basically just give this dude, who's a raging asshole, combat training to assist in his future domestic violence issues. As if that wasn't bad enough, and as if nobody saw any of this going wrong, Lewis Till was court-martialed and executed in Italy for the murder of an Italian woman and the rape of 2 others. So, that's fantastic, I say sarcastically. And the sad part is that this all took place just a few weeks before Emmett's 4th birthday. So, again, I don't really think the whole military angle really worked out as far as rehabilitating Lewis. Probably not the best option on the judge's part. Again, shocker. When Emmett turned 6, he actually contracted polio, which left him with a persistent stutter. Something I can only imagine was made fun of since people were less sensitive to speech impediments back then than they are now, and even then people are still assholes about speech impediments because apparently we can't just go, oh, hey, I'm sorry that you have that speech impediment. How can I help you? Mamie and Emmett ultimately moved to Detroit, where she met and married a man named Pink Bradley, which is honestly kind of a cool nickname. I'm not going to lie. Now, despite the move, Emmett preferred living in Chicago and later returned there to live with his grandmother. Finding that Detroit wasn't the place she imagined, Mamie and Emmett's stepfather Pink would also move back to join Emmett in Chicago. Eventually, the marriage between Pink and Mamie dissolved after almost a year or a little over a year, somewhere within that time frame, and then Pink moved back to Detroit and out of Emmett's life for the time being. Now, Mamie and Emmett lived together in a busy neighborhood in Chicago's South Side, kind of close by distant relatives. We're talking like second cousins and stuff like that. Now, to help support her family, Mamie began working as a civilian clerk for the U.S. Air Force. Bad bitch, get your bag, boo. And this provided a better salary than what usually would be through sharecropping. So she did what she could to support Emmett, and I respect the hell out of her for that. She also recalled that Emmett was industrious enough to help with chores at home, although she did state that he often got distracted, which, like, honestly, who hasn't? Lord knows I got distracted tons of times when I was supposed to be cleaning my room, I'd find like a random ass toy that I hadn't seen in 6 years and go, oh, hey, and then just hang out with that thing for like ever. And then, yeah. So honestly, can't really blame Emmett for that. He was just doing kid stuff. You know what I mean? Not that big of a deal, but I think it's cute that he was like, you know what, Mom, I'll help you out with the chores. You go to work, you do your thing, I'll take care of the house. Now, shortly after Mammy's marriage to Pink came to an end, he actually returned to her house on numerous visits and would threaten her. And on one particular visit, while Emmett was only 11 years old, he actually threatened Pink with a butcher knife and told him that he would kill Pink if he did not leave him and his mother alone. Which is honestly a really sad responsibility for an 11-year-old to have. But I think it shows his character and the love that he had for his mother and that sort of deep bond that he had with his family. He was willing to protect her even if it meant killing someone, especially somebody that he'd once considered his stepfather. And so again, it's sad that an 11-year-old has to step in to do that, but I respect the hell out of him for being like, hey, you don't mess with my mom. That's, I'm the same way. Like, you don't mess with my family. They're off limits. Like, do whatever you want to me, but as soon as you cross that line, like, we're not friends anymore. So I respect Emmett for that immensely. Now, besides threatening violence to protect his home, Emmett was actually described as a very funny, happy kid. In typical childhood fashion, Emmett, his cousins, and friends actually pulled a lot of pranks on each other. And one that I saw noted was that Emmett had gone on a road trip with a friend who fell asleep in the car. So Emmett took a pair of underwear and then put it over that friend's head. And then the friend woke up and was like, dude, why the hell is there underwear on my head? Just like a harmless little prank, but such like a young, like, little boy prank to do, which I don't know. I think learning about that is really endearing. Also, during my research, I learned that Emmett often went by the nickname Bobo, which is really, really cute. And again, like, once we get into it, it's just devastating what happened to him, because he seems like such a genuinely sweet, little, endearing young boy, and I'm upset that he ended up getting the shit end of a stick because of some racist assholes. Anywho, we'll get there. Now, Emmett was ultimately described as a very smart dresser. He took a lot of care in how he presented himself, and he was also said to be very good at baseball, and he spent a lot of time playing pickup games of baseball with his friends and his cousins. On top of this, something that I thought was also very heartwarming and endearing is that despite having such a severe stutter, the friends that he had and the peers that he often hung out with, they seemed to genuinely care about him, and he got along with them very great. Like, they seemed to be good people for him, so I'm glad that he had at least a few people in his corner that were really looking out for him, because kids can be mean, even when they're part of, like, your own community and stuff. Kids are just assholes. So I'm glad that he had a couple of people that saw him as the good person that he was and didn't, decide to bully the shit out of him for having a stutter. Now, the start of a very unfortunate series of events begins when Emmett decides to visit relatives in the South. Before leaving to see Mississippi in person, Mammy warned Emmett that the South was very, very different from the North and other parts of the United States. And she made it very clear that he needed to make sure he behaved himself around white people. Now, Emmett, I'm sure, had some sort of an idea of what that meant and what the South was like, but having grown up away from it, like, there's only so much an idea can prepare you for compared to the experience and what reality actually is. I think he probably thought, oh yeah, it's pretty bad, it's probably pretty racist, but never in his wildest dreams could have imagined that anything remotely close to what happened to him would be the reality of like an everyday experience for a black person in the South. Now, Emmett arrived at the home of his 64-year-old great-uncle Mose and Elizabeth Wright's house in Money, Mississippi on August 21st, 1955. 21st is not a number, in case you didn't know. On the evening of August 24th, Emmett and several young relatives and neighbors were driven by his cousin Maurice Wright to Bryant's grocery and meat market to buy candy. Because again, they're just young kids. And like, if we're being honest, candy is the motivation for most children, regardless of race. You could be freaking like, I don't even know. You could be a purple little Oompa Loompa child and you're probably motivated by candy, which is actually accurate because of Willy Wonka. But regardless, children love candy. They're going to the store for candy. Just such a young, naive thing to do. And if we're being honest, most of us adults also have a sweet tooth, so I'm just saying I would also go to the store for candy. Anywho, given the circumstances of what happened, it's sad that a journey to get candy would ultimately lead to the tragic circumstances of Emmett's death, because again, it's such an innocent motivation. Now, Emmett's friends and cousins were also children, and they were primarily children of sharecroppers who had been picking candy all day. So they wanted a sweet treat after a long day of work. They probably wanted to bring some home to their parents or something, or their parents were like, hey, go get milk from the grocery store while you're there getting candy. Something like that. Now, they went to Brian's Grocery, as I said, and an interesting fact is that this grocery store was known for mostly serving the local sharecropper population, which was predominantly black, if we recall. But this store was owned by a white couple, 24-year-old Roy Bryant, and then his 21-year-old wife, Carolyn. Now, the facts of what actually took place in the store are, heavily disputed, because it basically boils down to a he said, she said type of argument, but it's also fueled by racism and prejudice. So Lord knows, literally only God knows exactly what happened in that store. I think there's a lot of really informed guesses, but as for word what happened, who knows? Now, journalist William Bradford Huey reported that Emmett supposedly showed his friends outside the store a photograph of a white girl in his wallet and then bragged that this girl was his girlfriend. Again, if this actually happened, that is such harmless childhood, little boy, behavior. My little brothers do that. They're like, oh, this person's my girlfriend. They're not actually. They're just saying stuff. Boys boast to their friends. It's so freaking harmless when you look at it through, a normal, non-racist lens. Emmett's cousin, Curtis Jones, would later say that the photograph wasn't of just a white girl. It was actually a photograph of an integrated class that Emmett went to school at in Chicago. So it was literally just a class photo. I'm sure all of us have dozens of those stowed away online somewhere, or in a folder in our desk, or our parents have them on the fridge still. According to Huey and Jones, one or more of the local boys then dared Emmett to speak to Carolyn Bryant. If true, this, in theory, is a bit of a harmless prank that just turned incredibly sour, because the local black boys likely knew Emmett wasn't familiar with Southern customs and the racial implications. It was very clear that Emmett didn't necessarily fit in as far as Southern customs. I mean, he literally has an integrated class photo in his wallet. That was not a thing in the South. So it's very clear that Emmett was out of touch with, I guess, the culture of the South. I'm knocking my camera over. So again, probably a very harmless prank if this is something that did happen. However, in his 2009 book, Emmett's cousin Simeon Wright, who was present at the time, disputed the accounts of Huey and Jones, stating that Emmett didn't have a photograph of a white girl and that nobody dared him to flirt with Carolyn Bryant. Now, the way I see it is that the truth is most likely somewhere in the middle, or it's likely that a story was invented to make it seem more acceptable for the actions that were ultimately taken against Emmett. Speaking in 2015, Wright said, quote, "We didn't dare him to go to the store. The white folks said that. They said that he had pictures of his white girlfriend. There were no pictures. They never talked to me. They never even interviewed me." End quote. The FBI report completed in 2006 notes, quote, "Curtis Jones recanted his 1955 statements prior to his death and apologized to Mammy basically for what he said. This recantation, in Wright's own words, lead me to believe that it's more likely the white people involved in all of this were attempting to save face. But even then, if a prank happened and they were like, oh, hey, go do this thing, it'll be funny, it shouldn't have ended with Emmett losing his life. A prank is a prank, but I guess back then, black people, even talking to white people, was just something that nobody really thought of. It's mind-numbing to me because, again, I've been so far removed from this, and, I've never been opposed to talking to anybody. I'm a certified yapper. I talk to just about anybody, no matter who you are. So to me, I sometimes mentally have a hard time grasping that type of belief system and behavior. So it's just mind-boggling to me that if this did happen, if it was a harmless prank, that it would have ended in a 14-year-old boy being murdered for it. Regardless of what actually happened, and if Emmett did any of the behavior he was accused of doing, I don't think he did. It doesn't fucking matter at the end of the day, because it doesn't justify him being lynched. That's pretty much what I have to say on that. It doesn't matter what the motivation was or what happened. He never should have been murdered for anything that took place. Now, according to both Simeon Wright and Wheeler Parker, Emmett's cousins, Emmett supposedly wolf whistled at Carolyn Bryant. Wright said, quote, "I think Emmett wanted to get a laugh out of us or something," adding, "He was always joking around and it was hard to tell when he was serious," end quote. Wright stated that following the whistle, he became immediately alarmed because, again, Emmett isn't accustomed to the deep racist South and the social implications that whistling in the presence of a white person would make. Wright went on to say that it scared us half to death. You know, we were almost in shock. We couldn't get out of there fast enough because we had never heard of anything like that before. A black boy whistling at a white woman in Mississippi? No. Wright went on to state the Ku Klux Klan and night riders were part of our daily lives. Again, this was not part of Emmett's daily life living in Chicago on the north side of things. He went to an integrated school. Like, this is so different from the reality and the environment that he grew up in. So you have people with very different experiences in the same situation with very different reactions. Now, following his disappearance, Emmett's disappearance, a newspaper account stated that Emmett sometimes whistled to alleviate his stuttering. And for anyone who knows someone who stutters, they often have behaviors or words that can reset their speech patterns. It gets them out of a stuttering loop. I have two friends that stutter. One who stutters very heavily when he gets nervous. And for some people, those sort of reset words are curse words, which happens to work very well for Chris. Chris, if you're listening, hi. Other times, it's just like whistling. It's some sort of verbal tick that will reset your brain and get you out of a stuttering loop, because sometimes you can get stuck on a sound or a phrase for just an extended period of time. And I can only imagine how frustrating that is, because when I stumble over my words, I get pissed off, let alone if I had a stutter. So this means that if this is a verbal tick that Emmett uses to get out of a stutter, this would be a usual behavior for him to reset his speech. But that usual behavior is now suddenly unacceptable in the South because of the social implications, which is infuriating, because if someone whistles, it doesn't inherently mean that they're whistling at you. In fact, I highly doubt that Emmett even whistled at somebody. It's very likely he was just whistling in general to relieve the stutter. And there's no way for him to know that that's going to be offensive to somebody in the South, because honestly, who the hell even thinks of that? Now, to support this theory, Mammy said that Emmett had particular issues with pronouncing B sounds, which is not uncommon. There's certain sounds or certain words that people often get hung up with when they have a stutter. And she said that he may have whistled to overcome problems asking for bubblegum. This will come up again later in a passage of Carolyn Bryant's unpublished manuscript. Basically, she says that he may have been asking for bubblegum, but she doesn't remember him stuttering at all and doesn't think that he had a stutter. So she's removing that very important fact. But I think that most likely Emmett was asking for bubblegum, started to stutter, and then whistled to alleviate the stutter, and she got pissed off about it. Regardless, Mammy said that to help with Emmett's articulation, she actually taught Emmett how to whistle softly to himself before pronouncing his words, again, to alleviate the stutter. And all I can do is just imagine Mammy teaching Emmett how to whistle as like a way of calming himself, which is very endearing when you think about it. And it just sucks. And like, it should piss you off that this tiny little comfort for him is likely what caused his death. That this tiny little comfort to assist in his ability to speak was then used as a justification to kill him because people are raging racist assholes. So the immediate question that I had at this point in research was, how did a simple whistle turn into a fucking lynching? How did we get from point A to point B? Well, I'll tell you how. And honestly, it's a very incredibly disturbing tale because it escalates from 0 to 100 in a matter of freaking milliseconds. After Carolyn's husband learned about the whistling incident, he actively sought out young black boys in the area and then demanded that they identify who had insulted his wife. At one point that evening, Bryant, with a black man named J.W. Washington, approached a black teenager who was just walking along the road. Bryant then ordered Washington to seize this young black boy that was completely unrelated to anything that happened, and they placed this young black boy in the back of their pickup truck and then took him back to the store where they were going to have him be identified by a companion of Carolyn's who had witnessed the entire incident in the store. So they just straight up kidnapped a child off the street because he was black, and then acted like that was a completely normal thing to do, which is not, because imagine if this kid was misidentified and then was murdered the way that Emmett was murdered. Now, I'm not saying Emmett deserved to be lynched or murdered or anything at all. Like, don't take that out of context. But imagine if they just completely got the wrong person, murdered that person, and then went, oh shit, this was the wrong one. Like, would they have gone to find Emmett still? Like, I honestly don't think they would have cared. They probably would have just went on a killing spree until they got their right person. It's just asinine to me that they were, like, completely and totally comfortable with just kidnapping a child off of the street. But again, this was the reality of the South. And I guess I just never realized that, like, white people just had the audacity to do whatever the hell they wanted back then. Like, it's absolutely mind-boggling. If it doesn't stun you, maybe it's because you've already been educated on this matter, but, like, I found it stunned me beyond expectation. I was just not at all prepared for that being a thing that I was going to have to read in research papers. That said, they basically went, oh no, we have the wrong guy. Just kidding, dude. Don't even worry about it. And then they let the kid go. Which I can't imagine being that child and, like, trying to explain to your friends and family, like, oh, by the way, I was just kidnapped off the street by this random white man because he thought that I whistled at his wife. That would be an interesting dinner conversation. Now, at some point, Bryant learned that the boy in the incident involving his wife was actually from Chicago, not a local, and that he was staying with Mose Wright. So Bryant automatically knows, hey, this kid doesn't even live here, probably doesn't know our customs, doesn't fucking matter. We're going to go find him anyways. And several witnesses overheard Bryant and his 36-year-old half-brother John William J.W. Milam discussing taking Emmett from his house. So basically they were like, oops, we kidnapped the wrong kid off the street. Let's just go kidnap another child from the home that they're staying in. Because the first kidnapping plan was obviously a good decision. Let's just go do it again. But on top of that, we're just going to do freaking burglary as well. Because that makes a lot of sense. Unbothered by their crime spree, Bryant and Milam drove to Mose Wright's house in the early morning hours of August 28th, 1955, sometime between 2 and then 3:30 a.m. They were armed with a pistol and a flashlight, and they asked Wright if he had 3 boys in the house from Chicago. Emmett, at the time, was sharing a bed with another cousin, and there were a total of 8 people in the cabin. There's some choice language here that I'm not going to say, and by that I mean it's the N-word, and I've never said the N-word in my life, and I'm not about to do it now, even if I'm quoting something, so I'm going to refer to it as the N-word. Milam asked Wright to take them to, quote, the N-word who did the talking, end quote. Emmett's great-aunt offered the men money, trying her best to get them to go the fuck away, but they ultimately refused and told her that she just needed to leave or they were going to beat her too. Now, Milam ultimately rushed Emmett to put his clothes on. He said, get dressed. And then they informed Emmett that they were going to be taking him into essentially their custody. Mose Wright informed the men that Emmett was from up north and that he did not know any better. Basically saying, hey, he's not familiar with these customs. He doesn't know to not talk or whistle at white people or just even exist in the presence of white people. And Milam reportedly then asked, well, how old are you? And Wright said, well, I'm 64. And then Milam looked him dead in the eye and was just like, oh, cool. Well, if you tell anybody that we did this, you're not going to live to be the age of 65. Now, keep in mind, these guys have a gun. So I can't imagine being in Wright's position of like, wow, these guys are trying to kidnap my great nephew, but also like they can very well shoot me and kill me, and then I can't take care of my wife or the kids staying with me, my own children. Like, it's such a shitty situation to be in. So I don't even want to imagine the kind of emotions he was going through, because holy shit. Well, both men, Bryant and Milam, consequently marched Emmett out to the truck and again just abducted a child. So Wright claims to have heard both men ask someone that was in the car if Emmett was the boy that had done the whistling. And Wright says that he heard someone say yes. And when he was asked if the voice was that of a man or a woman, Wright said that it seemed like it was a lighter voice than a man's, but he couldn't be sure because, again, it's dark. There's only one flashlight. Like, he's not going to be able to see out into that car and go, oh, yep, that's a lady. So, it's hard to know who exactly was in the car. In a 1956 interview with Look magazine, in which they confessed to the killing, Bryant and Malam said they would have brought Emmett by the store in order to have Carolyn identify him, but stated they did not do so because they said Emmett admitted to the alleged offense, which makes no sense. And honestly, these guys were literally just looking for an excuse to kill somebody because, let's not forget, they already abducted one child. They have now abducted another. Let's call a spade a spade. They were angry and they wanted nothing more than to get vengeance for something that was, at the end of the day, a stupid, petty offense. And they weren't actually, in my opinion, going to take him back to the store and be like, oh, is this the right kid? They didn't care. They had enough information, according to them, that they were pretty much okay with everything that happened afterwards. And I believe firmly that even if they didn't find Emmett, and they found a different kid, their whole confirmation bias would have led to the death of another young black boy, even if it wasn't Emmett, because they wanted to hold somebody responsible. And I think at the end of the day, they wouldn't have really cared who it was. It just so happens that they ended up finding Emmett, who was the one that was actually there when the big scary incident happened. Once Emmett was in the truck, Malam and Bryant tied him up in the back of the truck and then drove him towards Money, Mississippi. Now, according to some witnesses, both men took Emmett back to Bryant's groceries. Again, the Bryant and Malam say that didn't happen, but there's claims that they recruited 2 black men to assist them in their scheme, who reportedly worked for, I think it was either Malam or Bryant. But that's what some witnesses say, is they went back, they got 2 black men who worked for either Bryant or Malam, and then they were like, hey, you're going to help us with this. And then the rest happened. So they drove to a barn in somewhere nearby. I can't remember the exact location. But they basically it was Drew, Mississippi. God, I can't read. So they drove him to Drew, Mississippi, and took him into a barn there. And they pistol-whipped the shit out of Emmett on the way, reportedly knocking him unconscious. And then Willie Reed, who was 18 years old at the time, saw the Bryant's truck passing by and later recalled seeing 2 white men in the front seat and 2 black males in the back. Some have speculated that the 2 black men, like I said, worked for either Bryant or Malam, and that they were ultimately forced to help with the beating, and that it wasn't done by choice. But the men that were supposedly seen with Bryant and Malam would later deny involvement. Honestly, it doesn't surprise me, because if we think about it critically, does it make sense for Bryant and Malam to recruit 2 black men? Yes. Why? Because at the end of the day, if shit hits the fan, they can point the finger at those 2 black men and go, oh, well, they did it. They were just a built-in scapegoat if it was ever necessary. They can say, oh, well, the 2 black guys did it. And then everybody in the racist South would go, oh, yeah, I think the 2 black guys killed that little black boy. That makes sense. So to me, it wouldn't be surprising if that actually happened. And honestly, it would be surprisingly smart of them to do that. Because, like I said, they'd have a built-in scapegoat. Now, Willie Reed said that while walking home that night, he actually heard beating and crying coming from the barn. And then Reed told a neighbor, and they both actually walked back up the road to a nearby water well that was somewhat close to the barn, where they actually were approached by Malam. And Malam asked if they had heard anything, to which Reed said no. And this was most likely a very scared and concerned answer, because at that point, what's going to happen to him? I don't think Reed wanted to be involved in whatever was going on, and I can't really blame him, because who's to say these raging white assholes that are currently killing Emmett wouldn't just kill him too for being a witness? So for him saying no, I don't blame him. Honestly, I can completely understand why he would lie in that situation. Others passed by the shed as well that night, and they also heard yelling, and a local neighbor also spotted Too Tight Leroy Collins at the back of the barn washing blood off of Bryant's truck. And then this neighbor also noticed what he believed was Emmett's boot. Obviously, Bryant said, oh no, like we killed a pig or a cow or something, and then actually that's my shoe, both of which are incorrect. Now, some have claimed that Emmett was shot then and there, killed, and then ultimately tossed over the Black Bayou Bridge in Glendora, Mississippi, near the Tallahatchie River. Now, once Emmett was dead and then disposed of, the group drove back to Roy Bryant's home in Money, Mississippi, where they reportedly burned Emmett's clothes, which I think is a really important detail that we should probably dissect a little bit, because if Bryant and Malam genuinely felt justified in what they did, there was actually, there's no reason to dispose of the evidence. The fact that they're concerned about leaving anything behind indicates that they knew that they weren't justified in what they had done and needed to cover it up. Again, just to cover my butt here, I'm not saying that murdering black people is justified. It's not. But we have to look at it at the context of the time and the location where this is taking place. This is in the deep racist South. There were lynchings that took place all over the place and tons of murders of black people, which were deemed justified because of the perceived circumstances. So, if you know you're not going to be justified in a system that actively protects you despite the lynchings that happen, then you know you've done and fucked up. So I think, in a way, this is very much an admission of guilt and, hey, we took this way too far. At least that's how I read it. In an interview with William Bradford Huey that was published in Look magazine in 1956, Bryant and Malam said that they intended to beat Emmett and throw him off an embankment into the river to just frighten him, because that's natural. I absolutely call bullshit on this, because throwing someone into a river after beating them, in my opinion, is very much attempted murder. But I digress. Both men actually told Huey that while they were beating Emmett, he called them bastards and declared that he was as good as they were, and said that he had sexual encounters with white women. Again, I call bullshit on this. Once Emmett had reportedly made these statements, they then put him in the back of Bryant's truck, drove him to a cotton gin where they took a 70-pound fan, then drove for several miles along the river looking for a very discreet place to dispose of Emmett's body, where they then shot him by the river and weighed his body down with the fan. The premeditation here is actually insane. There is so much forethought and planning, and they could have stopped at any point in time. They just didn't, which means this entire time their whole goal was to kill Emmett Till. They did not intend to beat him and let him go. Their entire process, their entire thought process was, we are going to kill this young little black boy because we can, because he whistled and we didn't like that and my wife got upset. Fuck these guys. I hate them. They make me mad. And if they don't make you mad, you might want to look in the mirror, because there's some serious self-reflection that needs to happen there. Anywho, if we look at Emmett's temperament, because I think this is something we need to assess here, and the situation that Bryant and Malam say Emmett was in, which is they were beating the shit out of him because they wanted to scare him, in my opinion, there is no way in hell that Emmett would look at these two thugs and say any of the shit they accused him of saying. This is very similar to the situation George Steiny was in. If you haven't listened to that episode, I highly recommend it. Go look at it. That case absolutely broke my freaking heart. I bawled my eyes out while researching it. But these two white fucknuggets are expecting me to believe that Emmett, who was beaten, in a position of inferiority, outnumbered, intimidated, had the audacity to look these two dudes dead in the eye and then insult them. I don't think anyone in their right mind, let alone a 14-year-old black boy, would ever do that in this type of situation. So again, bullshit, I say. And as all of this is going on with Emmett, which to be a fly on the wall for that. Jesus Christ. Mose Wright stayed on his front porch for approximately 20 minutes waiting for Emmett to return. Because I don't think he thought, oh yeah, they're going to go kill Emmett. They probably thought, oh, they're going to beat him up a little bit and bring him back, because at the end of the day, it was a fucking whistle. So, Mose Wright stays there for 20 minutes, and I can only imagine how long those 20 minutes probably felt. It probably felt like a goddamn lifetime, but Mose would not go back to bed that night. He and another man actually went into Money, Mississippi, got gasoline, and then drove around unsuccessfully for hours trying to find Emmett. And they eventually returned home at about 8 a.m. After hearing from Wright that he would not call the police because he feared for his life, Curtis Jones placed a call to the Lafleur County Sheriff and then another to his mom who lived in Chicago. Distraught, like any mother would be, Jones's mother then called Emmett's mother, Mammy, where Wright and his wife Elizabeth then drove to Summer, where Elizabeth's brother contacted the sheriff to report that Emmett was missing. Now, Bryant and Milam were consequently questioned by Lafleur County Sheriff George Smith. Both men admitted that they had taken Emmett from his great-uncle's yard, but claimed they had released him the same night in front of Bryant's store. Obviously, this is incorrect, and it contradicts a lot of witness accounts. Bryant and Milam were eventually arrested for kidnapping. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised they got arrested for anything, because, I mean, this system protects them. We'll see how badly it protects him, but I'm genuinely surprised that they got arrested. So I guess the police were doing the bare minimum, so good job, I guess, but, like, good lord. After the arrest, word got out that Emmett was missing, and then soon, Medgar Evers, Mississippi State Field Secretary for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and MZ Moore, head of the NAACP's Bolivar County chapter, became involved. They actually disguised themselves as cotton pickers and went into the cotton fields in search of information for literally anything that might have helped them find Emmett. And in all honesty, I commend both of them for going undercover in the sake of Emmett's best interest, because I can't imagine how scary that could have been, because Lord knows who killed him. At this point, people didn't know anything. They just knew that he was missing. And there was a very real chance that they themselves, despite being undercover, could also meet foul play. So they were incredibly brave to even do what they were doing. Unfortunately, despite their undercover efforts, they were unable to locate Emmett, and 3 days passed until Emmett's swollen and disfigured body was found by two boys who were fishing in the Tallahatchie River. For those who have never seen a decomposed body, count yourselves lucky, because it's something. The first decomposed body I ever responded to will be stuck in my head until the day that I die, because it feels wrong to say that it was gross, but it was gross. And the best way I can explain it is that part of you knows that the body is human, that it belonged to a person, but it's also difficult to process that because of the bloating, discoloration, and then just overall distorted composition of the skin and body itself. It's a really weird, uncanny experience. If you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, that's the best way I can explain it. Basically, if you know, you know. But it was discovered that Emmett's head was very badly mutilated. He had been shot above the right ear, one of his eyes was dislodged from the socket, and there was evidence that he had been beaten on the back and the hips, and his body had been weighed down by a fan blade fastened around his neck with barbed wire. The fact that Milam and Bryant went so far as to collar this poor child like he was a fucking animal makes my blood absolutely boil. Let alone the fact that they used barbed wire. They basically put a goddamned pronged collar on this kid and said, hey, we want to make sure he's dead, so hopefully he drowns and he doesn't float because we just attached a 70-pound freaking fan to him. Like, Jesus Christ, people, get it together. Unfortunately, Emmett was also found nude because if you remember, Milam and Bryant were like, oh yeah, we took his clothes and we burned them. And then Emmett was also seen to be wearing a silver ring with the initials LT, which stands for Lewis Till, because Lewis was also his middle name. So it was basically his an homage to his father, but then also it was his. And on top of the LT, there was also May 25th, 1943 carved into it. Now, Emmett's face was unrecognizable due to trauma and having been submerged in water. Let's not forget that water greatly impacts decomposition, and it also leads to skin slippage and a lot of really weird biological processes. Unfortunately, Mose Wright was called to the river to identify Emmett, and I would never, ever, ever, ever in my wildest dreams wish for literally any relative to have to identify the mutilated, decomposed body of their loved one. Let alone a relative who's been decomposing in a river for 3 days. It's it's a very dark reminder that Emmett wasn't the only victim in this, because now his great uncle has to live with this mental image of his mutilated grandnephew and that mutilated grandnephew's decomposed body. On top of that, like, his family's gonna have to see that during his burial. Like, it's all so completely and totally just messed up. And again, it made me realize, like, yes, what happened to Emmett was so bad, but it also just branched out and affected so many other people in his life. As for the silver ring that Emmett was wearing, it was ultimately removed and returned to Mose, who then passed it on to the district attorney as evidence. Naturally, Emmett's murder created a lot of publicity and commotion, namely drawing attention to the fact that a 14-year-old boy was murdered due to an arbitrary caste system that was completely made up for no other reason than to oppress people. With hundreds of thousands of people condemning Emmett's murder, this sparked a lot of debate and movement for social change, and images of Emmett's body were also circulated across media outlets throughout the nation, spurring northern states to express their severe discontent with the South's desire to maintain this arbitrary caste system, aka racism and Jim Crow laws. This led to several southern states becoming angry and hostile to northern states, and it was speculated that there might be a second civil war as a result of what happened to Emmett, just due to the public outrage. Now, I will warn you that the images of Emmett's body are very difficult to look at, so I don't encourage you to do that. But I will describe it to you in the best way that I can. Emmett's face is incredibly bloated and swollen. It looks sort of like if he had a bunch of tumors on his face pressing up underneath the skin. Obviously, it's not a tumor, but like that's literally the best way that I can explain it to you. His skin is discolored, and his eyes are pretty much non-existent. Like, his eyes just, they're not there. And his nose is even receded and displaced on his face. Like, it's just not sitting where it's supposed to be, and it's weirdly flat. Again, the images are very graphic, and I don't encourage you to look at it unless you have the stomach for it. I myself have seen quite a lot of bodies, but even this one was really disturbing to me because, one, it's a child, and then two, like, he's not recognizable at all. I mean, if you look at a photo of Emmett Till when he's alive, he's such a sweet looking little boy, and it's not comparable. Oh brother, it is rough. But I wanted to look at the photo because I wanted to understand exactly what type of violence was inflicted and forced on Emmett. I wanted to basically reconcile whatever it was that I thought he would look like with, like, oh shit, this is actually how bad that it was. So it was very sobering to look at that and go, oh, this is 3 times worse than what I actually imagined. So again, I caution you, but if it's something that you want to look at, the photos are out there. I just ask you to be respectful because obviously, like, I mean, it's a very tender moment. There's one where Mammy is standing beside Emmett's open casket. It's a very complex kind of situation. But let's get into the trial. So the trial taking place for Bryant and Milam was a very interesting one. To start out, Bryant and Milam had very limited funds and initially had a lot of difficulty finding attorneys to represent them. To which I say, LOL, sucks to suck, don't be a fucking racist piece of shit. Unfortunately, 5 attorneys at Summer Law Firm in Mississippi actually offered to work for Bryant and Milam, and they offered to do it pro bono, so for free. Because I guess they were like, let's just support racist murderers and not hold them accountable instead of just letting them, have a public defender. We'll just freaking support them ourselves, I guess. And then on top of this, Bryant and Milam's supporters eventually gathered about $10,000 for Bryant and Milam's legal defense, which would be equivalent to $117,000 as of 2024. God, I hate that people supported that, but Jesus Christ, they did, and they were able to afford a very stellar legal team. Basically, everything was stacked against the prosecution, but we'll get into that. So, the trial for Bryant and Milam was held in the county courthouse in Summer. the western seat of Tallahatchie County, because that's roughly the area where Emmett's body was found. Now, Summer had one boarding house, and it was a very, very small town, which was absolutely besieged by reporters from literally all over the country. It was hustling, it was bustling. They didn't really have a way of housing all of these people. And the trial was actually called the first great media event of the civil rights movement. It's sad that had to be because of a 14-year-old's brutal murder, but at the very least, it was getting coverage and drawing attention to a lot of very bad racial issues. Now, despite the fact that Summer was overrun with visitors, there were no hotels open to black visitors, which was a tactic that is very intentional, because why would we want anybody to come into this town and support the 14-year-old black boy that was brutally murdered when we can just exclude all of them and have nothing but white racist pieces of shit supporting Bryant and Milan? As for Emmett's mother, she actually arrived to testify in the trial and was severely outnumbered by the white people present. The trial also attracted Black Congressman Charles Diggs from Michigan. So Mammy and Diggs and several other black reporters they stayed at TRM, which was a nearby home in Mound Bayou. It was actually located on a large lot of land and was surrounded by armed guards. A lot of people say that it resembled a compound, but these precautions were completely necessary given the volatility of the environment and the clear racial divide that had only worsened after Emmett's death. The day before the start of the trial, a young black man named Frank Young arrived to tell officials that he actually knew of two witnesses to the crime, Levi Too Tight Collins and Henry Lee Loggins, both of whom were black employees of Milam, JW's brother, in the shed where Emmett was beaten. So Collins and Loggins were spotted with Milam, Bryant, and Emmett. Now remember, witnesses stated they saw two black men alongside Bryant and Milam, so this kind of corroborates that. Now, in a massive violation of civil rights and court proceedings as we know it, the prosecution team was actually never told about Collins and Loggins. In fact, Sheriff Strider booked them into Charleston, Mississippi jail just to keep them from testifying for the prosecution and ensured that the prosecution would never know about the existence of either man, which is infuriating to say the least, because this is someone who is in law enforcement and should be upholding the rights of everybody, and then he just said, fuck it, I don't want to do that. I want these two white guys to get off with murder. So he locked up key witnesses in jail to keep them from testifying. Yeah. I struggle with, like, coming to terms with the fact that this shit happens, because I want to believe the best in the system, but again, I am white, and a lot of white people, including myself, never have to worry about that, but that's a very real concern and possibility for cases pertaining to people of color back then and now. Like, the justice system actively seeks out to protect the white man, and this entire trial is a prime example of that. The trial itself was held in September of 1955 and lasted for only 5 days, which is surprisingly short given the circumstances. Now, attendees remembered that the weather was very, very hot at the time of the trial and was what many referred to as southern heat. The courtroom was filled to capacity with 280 spectators. Black attendees sat in segregated sections, shocker, as was customary back then. Press from major national newspapers attended, including black publications eager to give Emmett a voice. Black reporters were required to sit in the segregated black section and very far away from the white press, and then even farther from the jury, because heaven forbid the jury feel intimidated by Emmett's supporters. Heaven forbid anybody actually cares about the 14-year-old boy that was brutally murdered. Jesus Christ. Oh God, this case makes me so mad. I hate it so much. Sheriff Strider welcomed black spectators coming back from lunch with a cheerful quote, "Hello, N-word." And, yeah, that says everything you need to know about him. Some visitors from the north found that the court was run with surprising informality because, like, let's be honest, it makes a lot of sense given the sheriff involved. But jury members were allowed to drink beer on duty, And many white male spectators just wore handguns because that's cool. Let's have that be in a courtroom along with the alcohol. Make it make sense. The entire jury was also made solely out of white men, so we can see where this is going already. Bryant and Malam's defense was just to seek, to basically just sow doubt into just about anything they could, but they focused mostly on the identity of the body that was pulled out of the river, stating that it wasn't Emmett. And Emmett was most definitely alive, and he was flourishing. It's just nobody's seen him since the moment he interacted with Bryant and Malam. They said it could not be positively identified, and they questioned whether Emmett was dead at all, which is stupid as shit because both men admitted to actively seeking Emmett out and would have known exactly what he looked like. The defense also asserted that although Bryant and Malam had taken Emmett from Moses' house, they had released him that night. They were good. They didn't kill him. The defense attorneys attempted to prove that Mose Wright, who was addressed as Uncle Mose by the prosecution and Mose by the defense, could not identify Bryant and Malam as the men who took Emmett from his cabin. Keep in mind, it was in the middle of the night, and yes, it's not like streetlights were everywhere, so not being able to identify Malam and Bryant isn't that surprising. However, the defense is missing a very key fact, which is that Mose knew their names and that both men admitted to being there and verbally identified themselves to Mose. So the argument is completely invalid as far as I'm concerned, but that didn't matter, apparently. So, despite being in a very dangerous position, Mose actually testified against Bryant and Malam. Mose's testimony was considered absolutely remarkable, courageous, brave, like all the accolades to him, especially given the time period, because this is a black man who's just openly testifying in a courtroom full of white people that are all drinking beer and have guns on them. He's testifying against other white men, and you didn't do that back then, and you didn't do it with the expectation that you were going to survive the next day. So Mose doubled down and was like, no, fuck you guys, fuck the system, I'm testifying on the behalf of my grandnephew. And I respect that so much. So much. Now, aside from Mose, Mammy testified as well and stated that she had instructed her son to watch his manners in Mississippi and insisted that if a situation ever came up where he was basically asked by a white person, like, you need to get on your knees and beg for forgiveness, that he would just go ahead and do it. The defense also went on to question her identification of Emmett and Emmett in the casket in Chicago. Because she had a $400 life insurance policy on him, which was about $4,700 in 2024. As far as I'm concerned, who gives a shit about the life insurance policy? And also, how fucking dare you question whether a mother knows what her child looks like? She carried him for 9 months. I don't think you did. And she had to look at a brutalized, decomposed body of her child? Fuck you, dude. Moms know what their kids look like. It doesn't matter if they're dead and they know. Moms know. So first of all, you can shut the hell up. Leave that woman alone. She's been through enough. Oh my lord. Well, the trial continued, and LaFleur County Sheriff George Smith, Howard, and several reporters, both black and white, ultimately attempted to locate Collins and Loggins. Remember, these men were arrested and thrown in jail to keep them from testifying. So they were never located and brought to the stand to testify because the sheriff, who's helping look for them, knows fully well where they are because he's the one who put them in jail, and it's just like, oh shit, guys, I don't know where they are. Oh well. Thankfully, there were 3 other witnesses that had said, hey, like, we know that these 2 guys were there. Unfortunately, it would have been better to have the men themselves that were there testify. But again, the corrupt justice system was like, you know what? We're just going to make sure that doesn't happen. So they did have 3 witnesses that said, hey, these guys are there. But again, the 2 men that were supposedly there, Collins and Loggins, were not able to testify. Overall, there were also 2 other witnesses who testified that they had heard someone being beaten in the barn. They could hear the blows of someone being hit, and they could hear somebody crying. One witness testified so quietly that the judge ordered him several times to speak louder. And this is going to break your heart because it freaking ruined me. But he testified that he heard a victim call out, quote, "Mama, Lord have mercy, end quote. And the idea, I'm getting chills. The idea of Emmett crying out for his mother, if it doesn't move you, I don't know what will, because there's just something innate about the experience of wanting your mom when you're sick, when you're hurt, when you're scared. I mean, you can have the worst relationship ever with your parent, and sometimes all you want is just your mom, you know? And in my opinion, it's one of the most human reactions and experiences that anybody has. And again, this testimony just solidifies that Emmett was a young boy, a child, just a sweet little baby. Like, he wasn't even a man yet. Like, he didn't deserve what happened to him at all. And he's there getting the shit beat out of him. And all he can do is just think about crying out for his mom. Like, it sucks so bad. It's so bad. As if the trial itself wasn't corrupt enough, Sheriff Strider, again, the man who locked up Collins and Loggins, testified for the defense. He said that his theory was Emmett was alive, and that the body retrieved from the river was white, which has to be the dumbest fucking shit that I've ever heard of, because you don't just stop being black once you die. You don't just stop being black when you've been dead for 3 days. Like, that doesn't make any sense. That is the dumbest shit that I have ever heard, and to have him get on the stand and just say that with full confidence is infuriating. And the fact that anybody believed what he said. Get out of here. As if that wasn't bad enough. A doctor from Greenwood stated on the stand that the body was too decomposed to identify and therefore had been in the water too long for it to be Emmett. Which was even more bullshit being spewed from the stand after both of these guys swore on the Bible that they were going to be honest. And I don't think God is really happy with you guys for just lying out of your ass like that. So I hope he holds that one against you if you're alive and haven't died yet. But if you've died already, I hope he held that against you, because Jesus Christ. You guys are just spewing some of the most stupid shit I've ever heard in my life. Now, in the concluding statements of the trial, one prosecuting attorney said that what Emmett did was wrong, but that his action warranted a spanking, not murder. I don't think Emmett did anything wrong, but at least this man isn't advocating for racist-fueled child murder, which is the bare minimum, but at least he's meeting the bare minimum. Now, Gerald Catham passionately called for justice and mocked the sheriff, good for you, dude, and doctor statements that alluded to a conspiracy surrounding Emmett. He was 100% right about the conspiracy taking place because, again, the sheriff directly interfered with the trial. Mammy also stated that she was very impressed with Gerald's summation of what happened, which reassures me because I think it shows that she felt someone was genuinely sticking up for her and her son and looking out for them. So I'm glad she had that, and somebody in this legal setting actually gave a shit about Emmett. As for the defense stated that the prosecution's theory of the events that night Emmett was murdered was improbable, and say the jury's, quote, forefathers would turn over in their graves, end quote, if they convicted Bryant and Milam. All I can say to that is just cry me a goddamn river, because nobody actually cares, dude. Now, at this point, only 3 outcomes were possible in Mississippi for capital murder. You basically had life imprisonment, the death penalty, or acquittal. On September 23rd, the all-white, all-male jury, both women and blacks had been banned from sitting on the jury, they thought it would be a great idea to acquit both Milam and Bryant, and this was done after 67 minutes of deliberation. So, if this isn't proof that the trial was just a show to not violate these guys' rights, I don't know what is. In fact, one juror said, quote, if we hadn't stopped to drink pop, it wouldn't have taken that long, end quote. So, clearly these assholes took their job very seriously, and actually gave a shit about the community. They didn't. They absolutely suck. And, in the end, not only were Milam and Bryant acquitted, they weren't even indicted on kidnapping charges. Because let's remember, they were arrested for kidnapping one boy that wasn't Emmett. Then they kidnapped Emmett. But apparently, they weren't going to be charged for either kidnapping incident because they're infallible and they can't do anything wrong. Now, I want to be clear, this is a very light rendition of the events leading up to the trial and the trial itself, but I think throughout this entire process, there is a person who set all of this shit into motion that is often forgotten about. So, I want to step away from the trial and the shitty decision that the jury made and take a very specific look at Carolyn, because her testimony, while it wasn't heard by the jurors, she did say it to the judge with the prosecution and the defense present, and she made very specific claims about what happened while Emmett was at the store. So I'm going to read an excerpt here. In trial proceedings, Bryant testified that Emmett grabbed her hand while she was stalking candy and said, quote, "How about a date, baby?" End quote. Caroline said that after she freed herself from his grasp, Emmett followed her to the cash register, grabbed her waist, and said, quote, "What's the matter, baby? Can't you take it?" Caroline said she freed herself, and Emmett said, quote, "You needn't be afraid of me, baby," used one unprintable word, and said, quote, "I've been with white women before," end quote. Caroline also alleged that one of Emmett's companions came into the store, grabbed him by the arm, and then ordered him to leave. Caroline would later recant this, but then she would also go on to write a manuscript about herself and her involvement in the case titled, "I Am More Than a Wolf Whistle." And this was supposed to be released sometime in 2036, I think, after she died. Thankfully, the 99-page manuscript was leaked because originally it wasn't going to be published, and people like myself have a bit of insight on what Carolyn was going to say, and let's just say it's infuriating, and I hate her more than I expected to, because there were sentiments expressed in the book where Caroline's basically pulling the "I can't be racist because I liked this one black person" card. She expresses sentiments for a woman that was hired help, who went by the name of Annie Freeman. And Caroline stated that she loved Freeman because she had, quote, "skin the color of hot chocolate." Again, this reads very much as, "I can't be racist because I like this one black woman," even though she was very much underpaid in my care and definitely oppressed by my racism as well as others. In her memoir, Caroline also discusses a time when her boyfriend showed her a hanging tree, which Caroline remembered would be a terrific tree to climb if she were a tomboy. Again, Carolyn, this is not helping your case, like, literally at all. This is just you going, "Yeah, black people got hung here. That really sucks. Oh, well, that looks like a really cool tree. I'd love to climb it. And I'm not at all upset that I would be desecrating the place where countless black people died. Because, if anything, I'm racist, and, oh well." So, the memoir definitely reads as, like, "Oh, I'm not racist, but it doesn't do anything to prove that she's not racist. In fact, it just solidifies the fact that she's racist and she sucks." The manuscript reportedly ends with the following paragraph, quote, "I always felt like a victim as well as Emmett. He came into our store and put his hands on me with no provocation. Do I think he should have been killed for doing that? Absolutely, unequivocally, no. Did we both pay a price for it? Yes, we did. He paid dearly with his loss of life. I paid dearly with an altered life." End quote. Throughout the book, Caroline also mentions and describes Emmett as a man and not a 14-year-old boy. She refers to him exclusively as, quote, "man," and states he appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s. Now, if you've seen pictures of Emmett, there is no way anyone would genuinely confuse him for a man instead of a boy. He is still very round-featured, and he still has, like, lingering baby fat / like, that chubbiness, like, that kids often have in their face. It's still there. You look at him and you go, "Oh, yeah, that's a kid." You're not like, "Oh, my God, what a 20-year-old man." That's bullshit. She's lying. I don't buy it for a second. That said, I also want to read a page of the manuscript and attempt to dissect some of the psychology behind the motivations of Emmett's murder and then Caroline herself. So this is the excerpt. Quote, "The door opened and a young black man who appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s entered the store. I found out later that this young man's name was Emmett Till. I was behind the counter ready to wait on him, and Juanita was in the back room with all 4 boys. The young man went directly to the candy counter. Once there, I asked him if I could help him. He asked me for some candy, gum, or some type of sweets. We had jars of candy and cookies on the top of the counter. I opened the case door to get the items he pointed out and the ones that he wanted to buy. I mentally totaled the amount he owed. He reached for the small bag of candy from the top of the counter. When I held out my hand for the money, he put no money into my hand, but instead He caught my hand and told me in a clear voice, "Don't be afraid of me. I've been with white girls before." Whether he stuttered or stammered, I don't recall. I was afraid. His grip was strong as he held my hand from across the counter. Complete astonishment, then fear filled my mind. He asked me, "How about a date, baby?" My mind raced. I feared... God, her misspellings are awful. I feared that I first thought he was going to molest me or worse. I was afraid for myself and my babies. My babies were in the back room. He then grinned at me as I jerked my hand free from his and dashed towards the main counter to get Roy's pistol. When I reached the open space between the counters, the young man Emmett was there. He had slipped through and caught me with both of his hands on my hips. He was saying to me, "What's the matter, baby? Can't you take it?" I became even more frightened as he was much larger and taller than I. "Oh my God, what is going to happen? What is he going to do to me?" were the thoughts that raced through my mind. I continued to struggle to get free from his grasp. As I was struggling, he said, "You needn't be afraid of me. I've fucked white women before." I was about to explode with fear. As the seconds flew by, never before nor since have I been that afraid. I screamed for help, but no one responded. I was afraid and alone. I was shaking all over because nothing like this had ever happened before. I'd always felt safe in the store, but now I was afraid. I jerked and twisted as hard as I could, and I could feel the strong grip loosen from around my hips. Once free, I saw another young man pulling Emmett away from me. The young man was telling Emmett, come on, we have to get out of here." End quote. There's a few things I want to point out in this excerpt that I think hint at the truth. Number one, the bubblegum. I firmly believe Emmett was actually asking for bubblegum, like his mom suspected, and that he had begun to stutter, and while he was stuttering, he whistled to break the stutter. Whether he stuttered or stammered, I don't recall, is a very specific statement for Carolyn to include, which means Emmett most likely did stutter or stammer, and once it was pointed out, "Hey, you're a racist piece of shit, you read into this and you're wrong," she decided to omit that. But by including that sentence in this manuscript, it's basically an admission that that did happen, because otherwise there is no reason for her to specifically point out that it didn't happen. If it didn't happen, you wouldn't have to explain whether or not it was there or not. It just wouldn't be included, you know what I mean? Like, you wouldn't have to mention it at all. I also think her saying, "I screamed for help and nobody answered," if you legitimately screamed for help in a store and your husband is there, your husband would have heard you and your husband would have come to help. Which leads me to believe you weren't actually in any legitimate danger, which would make you scream. Obviously, there's fight, flight, or freeze. She didn't do any of these, in my opinion, because there was no reaction from any of the white people in that store to come help her. Because let's be honest, this is the racist South. If she had made any sort of fuss in that moment that she had been assaulted by a 14-year-old black boy, every white person in that store would have turned around and automatically been on Emmett in that instant. There wouldn't have been any hesitation. It would have happened right then and there. They wouldn't have had to find him later if she had actually screamed for help. Again, I think that there's some truth in the sense that she held out her hand for payment. I think Emmett might have touched her hand, which upset her, because how dare a black boy touch a white woman? I don't think he grabbed her hand. Also, Emmett was not a large child, so I don't know where she's getting this size comparison from, that he was just inherently larger than her and bigger than her. I think that there's a lot of truth in here when she's trying to lie and cover things up. So I'm also going to kind of break down some stuff in the next few paragraphs, so bear with me. First and foremost, Caroline's recount, like I said, supports a lot of what Emmett's relatives and friends stated, including what his mother speculated about the bubblegum and the stutter and the whistle and things like that. Specifically in this narrative from Caroline, we can see a few points of concern. Carolyn speaks in a way where she wants to be perceived as a victim in this situation, using specific language such as afraid and, "oh, he caught me," etc. She also discusses her kids and how her kids are nearby. This is language that is specifically used to evoke emotion and garner sympathy. Carolyn seeks to be understood and viewed in a very specific light, especially given the social backlash for everything that happened. I firmly believe that Caroline is not capable of viewing her actions as wrong, and consequently she created a narrative that supports her racism. People who have strong moral belief systems are often incapable of adapting those belief systems as society grows and changes. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you know I've discussed things like cognitive dissonance, which is something that often happens when people's worldviews, moral codes, or strong belief systems are confronted by contradicting facts. The human body in these cases will experience severe mental, emotional, and physical turmoil as a response, and the human brain naturally wants to protect itself from things that are perceived as harmful. So many people avoid cognitive dissonance at all costs, no matter how wrong they are. Unfortunately, people with racist belief systems have a very difficult time deconstructing their belief system. It is incredibly uncomfortable and painful, and it's not that different from deconstructing religion. As a result, some people will absolutely double down in a toxic belief system rather than accept a painful change. That's not for everybody. Some people are capable of change and they accept that pain and they go for it, but there are so many people that don't do that. And I think that that's what's happening here. Carolyn cannot accept the pain of being wrong, of having her belief system questioned, and realizing that she contributed in the murder of a child. So she's going to consequently construct a narrative to protect herself and that belief system to avoid that pain. I also believe that Carolyn never, ever, ever changed her racist views, which is why I want to talk about the psychology that surrounds racism, because I think it provides a lot of context for what we see in her manuscript. We, as human beings, seek to categorize things. We have a wonderful pattern recognition system in our brains, and it's a way to provide context when we categorize things. We, as people, categorize stuff just like, oh, look, that's a lamp. Here's my experiences with lamps. Oh, this is this brand of water. Here's my experience with this brand of water. It was, that's how we operate. Those, in simple terms, that's how we operate. So people who, quote, don't see color are fucking lying. They do see color. There's no way to avoid it. There are white people, black people, Hispanic people, all shapes, sizes, and colors. Again, I am by no means racist, but when I meet someone, my brain automatically categorizes that person as Hispanic, black, white, Asian, Native American. There's nothing wrong to that. Your brain is supposed to do that because it provides context when it comes to meeting people and talking to them. People often say that it's a bad thing to look at someone and go, oh, that's a black person. It's not. That is your brain saying this is this type of this person is black. They belong to the black community. I am recognizing their culture, their worldview, their history, and I'm going to contextualize all this. Now, the difference is that the average person's brain goes, okay, I'm speaking to a black person. Here's what I know about black culture. Here's what I know about history surrounding black people. These are all of the bajillion experiences that I've had with black people. And their brain goes, okay, well, that's cool. This is going to inform my interaction with them. But this is a person who is a human being. They seem friendly. Oh, this person's a man. This person's a woman. Here's how I can relate to them. Normal interactions. The racist brain does not do that. So if you as a non-racist person talk to someone that is a person of color, you are categorizing things, you are contextualizing things, and it helps inform your interaction at a base fundamental level with the person that you are talking to and having an exchange with, but at the end of the day, you see that person as an equal. Like I said, the racist brain doesn't do that. They use categories and context very differently. Compared to the last example I gave, it might be something like, oh, this is a black person. They belong to black people. They are part of that group. I'm white. I belong to white people. This person, because they belong to the black community, is less than I am because I am white and I belong to the white community. This black person, because they're part of that black community, is a thug, they're violent, they're a drug dealer, they're a criminal, etc. Their brain uses categories to distinctly separate the humanity of the black person or person of color. It doesn't go, oh, hey, I'm going to use this information of them being black to inform my interaction with them because this is what I know and this is how I've interacted with black people before. It seeks to remove that human connection rather than promoting it through understanding. Obviously, racism was created to divide and oppress. That is why it exists. That said, the only way racism sustains itself is to intentionally find things that support that racist belief system. Most people can say, oh, I had maybe one negative experience with a black person, but the 84 other black people I've met are absolutely fantastic. Therefore, it's not the race that's the problem. It's just this one person who's a shitty human being. It's not that they're just an evil black person. The racist doesn't do that. The racist goes, oh, this one black person is representative of all black people. So the racist is like, cool. This is going to support my ideology and my assumption based on all black people, based off this one individual, because they have to do this. If they don't do this, racism literally does not work as a system. They can't make an exception for one person the way that the normal brain would. If they make an exception, then racism doesn't have a point because it would be admitting that not all black people fit this caste system that they've established. So again, rather than confront, hey, maybe my belief system is ass backwards, they double down. And rather than confront the idiocracy of their belief system, they specifically look for reasons to support that belief system. I know it's a lot to take in, but when you think about it, racism is just a social construct, and social constructs only maintain themselves because people believe in it. It's basically like time. Like, time literally is a social construct, and the only reason time exists is because we as a society have collectively decided that an hour is an hour, and we support that system. 100 years from now, the time system that we have constructed and have believed in for like hundreds of years, we could decide that the span of 1 hour now is actually the span of 2 hours 100 years in the future. Like, it's a social construct. It has to be self-sustaining. If we go back to the passage in Carolyn's manuscript, we can see that this racist ideology that she has is being supported by her own narrative, with statements like, oh my god, what is going to happen? What is he going to do to me? This isn't a woman in a uncomfortable situation with a man going, oh no, this is something I have to think about. I myself am a woman. There are times where I go, I am in the company of a man. I need to be prepared in case shit goes sideways. Yes, I have had wonderful experiences with men, but this is something that I need to be aware of. This is not that type of situation. This is a woman who goes, oh, this person's black, therefore they are automatically going to be a young, evil rapist who wants to take me out back and do really bad things to me. She's just saying, oh, it's a black person, this is what they're going to want to do to me. It's not it's not the same thing. She's just assuming he's going to do her harm because of his race, not because he's a man. As far as I mean, he's not even a man. He's a 14-year-old boy, if we're being honest. But, if she were, let's say, in the context of a 25-year-old guy, and she's like, oh, I need to know what I'm going to do if shit goes sideways. What if I'm alone in the store? That's a perfectly reasonable thought process to have. She does not have a reasonable thought process in this situation because it's a 14-year-old child, and she's not going, like, you're not scared of a 14-year-old kid. There's no reason for that. And she's not even basing it on his gender. She's basing it solely on the fact that he's black, if that makes any sense. So she's supporting her own racist ideology by making an assumption that Emmett is inherently an evil rapist, like I said, because he's black. She's supporting her own racism by even making this manuscript. She's essentially going, see, my assumption was right because he did do those things, instead of saying, oh, my assumption was wrong. Emmett isn't a rapist because he's black. He was just whistling because he has a speech impediment. In fact, I firmly believe that Carolyn lied in this entire manuscript to support her racist belief system and support the early assumption she made of Emmett. Because in her mind, if I can prove that he actually was an evil black rapist, then I wasn't wrong in my racist assumption. It takes the blame away from her. It takes the onus of her own racism away. Again, I know it's a lot to take in, but when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense. And I also think that at this time period, being a white woman, you barely had rights yourself. So what better way to ensure your importance and your competency than by oppressing another group of people? I can save my skin by targeting someone else. If I participate in this caste system, it will be better for me than if I didn't. We also have to acknowledge that Carolyn is exaggerating things to create an emotional moment that she knows will get people upset. She knows that manipulating people's feelings will cloud their logic. Do I think Emmett touched her hand? Yes. Like I said, I think he did. Do I think he grabbed her? No. At the end of the day, I think she was offended because a black boy who was not familiar with Southern customs touched her fragile little white hand. And when she realized that not everyone was a racist piece of shit who would defend her for being so appalled that she was touched by a black boy, she consequently created a narrative that would have people go, well, maybe she was racist, but Emmett did grab her hand and Emmett did say X, Y, and Z, which isn't okay. So it completely deflects from the racial issue. Caroline also fundamentally lacked any accountability throughout her life for what happened to Emmett. And I think it got to a point that she was so used to saying Emmett was this dangerous boy that she actually started to believe it. Because if you tell a lie enough times, your brain eventually reaches a point where it starts to rewrite fact with fiction. And it makes it very difficult to discern what actually happened with what you've been telling yourself for, say, 60 years. And it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case here. Again, we also need to look specifically at the last paragraph of the manuscript where she equates Emmett's murder to the turmoil in her own life. It doesn't read as her recognizing the wrong done to Emmett, but that he was somehow responsible for the resulting turmoil in her life. The language used reads as a veiled attempt at empathy, when in reality she's just saying, well, if he didn't die, my life wouldn't have gone to shit. There's a fundamental disconnect in her ability to self-reflect, and she rehashes this over and over again, and I'm pretty sure she just has a raging victim complex that she's supported with her own belief system for decades, where she's still somehow being wronged by Emmett, even though he died, and she is part of the reason that he died. And part of the reason I think she has a victim complex is because people with victim complexes experience a severe lack of empathy for other people. And they are firm believers that their own victimhood is greater than the suffering of literally anybody else. And if you look at that last paragraph of her manuscript, that is exactly how it reads, where she's like, wow, he died. That's really shitty, but what about what happened to me? My life went to shit. He got lynched, and yeah, he got lynched, boohoo, that's sad, but like, what about me? That's exactly how that paragraph reads. And people with victim complexes also have this superb sense of self-pity. Poor me, I'm the one who was done wrong here. Blah, 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 blah. I'm the one that should have been helped. I'm the one that was wronged. And they God, I don't know how to talk about this without getting angry. They fundamentally misunderstand people's empathy. And it's not, hey, Carolyn, I'm sorry that this happened to you. It's, hey, Carolyn, I'm sorry that this happened to Emmett, and I'm sorry that you kind of got involved in it. Life really did suck for you. They take that as validation to, oh, see, my pain was justified. My pain, my suffering is worse than what happened to Emmett. Because some people probably did feel bad for her. And, you know, some people were probably like, well, why can't people just get over this? Man, I feel bad for her. But she's not going to take it as, oh, man, they feel bad for me to a certain extent. She's taking it as a justification that she never did anything wrong ever. And that her victimhood is somehow more severe than what happened to Emmett. So, again, a lot to take in. But stuff that I wanted to talk about and something that I think is just really important. Because I don't think she formally recanted anything that she accused Emmett of, even though she's now deceased. It's insane. I by no means approve of it. And it just infuriates me to think that somehow we are still having issues like this, because we have, like I said, Trey Reed, who was now found murdered in Delta, Mississippi on a college campus. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Again, I don't have anything super important to say as far as closing this out. I'm glad I researched this to educate myself on Emmett's case and what happened to him, because I honestly had no idea that it was this bad and that the people involved were this annoying and this bad. So hopefully I educated you guys a little bit. Again, I think Carolyn definitely has a victim complex. I think severe issues with racism and confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance and the likes. As far as I know, everybody involved in this, whether it was Bryant, Milam, or Caroline, they've all said super racist shit over the years and have not detracted their statements at all. And then once Bryant and Milam were acquitted, they did an interview where they admitted to everything that they did because they were now protected from double jeopardy where they could not be retried. Overall, a very severe miscarriage of justice. Emmett definitely deserved better. And it's just sad to see that 70 years later, this shit's still happening and that we have to go and go through this again. And again, I'm a white person, so it's not like it impacts me the way it impacts the black community. But I want people to know that I see it. And the fact that this shit's happening 70 years later is absolutely ridiculous. And I am so sorry that your community is still having to face this type of bullshit. Because you guys don't deserve it. You don't. There's no reason for it. Like I said, racism is just upheld by their own issues. It is a caste system. It is a social construct. It literally would not exist if they weren't feeding into that belief system. And it doesn't help that the political climate is just exacerbating these problems. But I want you to know that I see you guys. Please, if there's other cases similar to Emmett's that I should look into for my own education, please let me know. I need to do better, honestly. 'Cause I've lived in my own little white bubble for a very long time, and so I think I deserve to, know a little bit more about your pain and your struggles as a community. So I apologize that I've been so uninformed for so long. That's my fault. Also partially the education system's fault, because let's be honest, they don't do a very good job about teaching this stuff. But I will continue to do cases where I talk about minorities like George Stinney and the Osage Indian murders. Again, communities that have faced hardship in law enforcement and having legit justice over the years. So I don't have much else to say. As always, please stay safe out there. Take care of each other. Stay vigilant. Stay psyched out. And I will see all of you guys in the next episode.